So I'm spending the day walking around London today, and I wanted to stop here and show you this hotel here, the Biltmore, but also explain to you a crazy story of true crime, double agents, murder, and then ultimately the grave of a man named Alexander Litvinenko. I think that's how you say his name. So Alexander Litvinenko, he was a Russian spy in the 1990s. He worked for the SFB, he worked for the KGB, and he ended up publicly criticizing and exposing the Russian government about its shady dealings and murderous history. Alexander co-wrote a book accusing the Russian government of purposely blowing up 64 apartments in 1999, killing something like 300 people, and with Vladimir Putin blaming it on the Chechens, calling it a terrorist attack in order to justify his new war. He claimed that the Russian government organized the 1999 Armenian parliament shooting. He also publicly accused Putin of being a pedophile in a news article in 2006, curiously just a few months before he was murdered. So obviously he was on Russia's radar, and especially Vladimir Putin's radar. In fact, I believe he even saw some jail time for a year or so before he was released. But most likely fearing for his life or his freedom, he left Russia and found asylum in the United Kingdom. And he began working for Britain's Secret Intelligence Service. Back at the hotel where I was, now it used to be called the Millennium. Back then it was the Millennium, but it's still the Pine Bar. Now this all started November 1st, 2006. Alexander met up with two ex-Russian spies that were supposedly friends of his from the past, from his past life in Russia. The two suspects, Dmitry Koftin and Andrei Lugovoy, can both be seen walking up and out of the bathroom just 15 minutes apart from one another. So after that meeting, Alexander went home, did not feel well. At some point after that night, started vomiting and was having bloody diarrhea. 2 days later or so, he checked himself into the hospital feeling very ill. At that point, knew that he had been poisoned, that he had been double-crossed. He had a dangerously low white blood cell count, signs of bone marrow failure, and he was losing his hair already. His vital organs, his liver, kidney failure was starting. But that early on, the doctors weren't sure exactly what was going on with him. I mean, he's telling the doctors and telling these people that he was an ex-secret agent, that he was an ex-spy. That rang the bells of British intelligence, so they got involved. The good thing was that he was alert and able to talk to these people, talk to the doctors, talk to these special agents, talk to these investigators, so they could find out what exactly was going on. Ultimately, his blood and urine samples were sent to a nuclear research center because clearly his symptoms appeared to be radiation exposure of some type. And they did indeed find radiation in his blood. So specifically, it's called polonium-210, and it is extremely radioactive, very, very potent, very dangerous. When ingested, it will destroy your cells and your immune system and basically lead to rapid organ failure, liver failure, kidney failure, which is exactly what happened to Alexander. After these findings, the Health Protection Agency was alerted to the possibility of a citywide radiation exposure to the public. They immediately went to the hotel and inside the restaurant and found traces of radioactive contamination on the tables and chairs, on the sink in the bathroom, on the hand dryer, on the handle of the door, exactly where those two suspects had gone during their meeting with Alexander. But it didn't end there. Traces of polonium were found all over the city and beyond. In fact, wherever these two suspects went during their time in London, where they stayed, where they ate, wherever they had gone, they left a trail of radiation behind. Upwards of 50 different areas in London and beyond had been contaminated. Even the London Underground, the stations and the trains, areas where they sat or leaned or something that they would have touched, they found traces of polonium. And he's not the only one that was affected by this radiation. In fact, his wife, Marina, had small exposure. Some British police tested positive. Bar staff at the Pine Bar tested positive. Nobody else died, but all in all, over 120 people had been in contact with him, but they all survived. And a large majority of this was kept quiet at the time to prevent massive citywide panic. And all the while this investigation was going on, Alexander Litvinenko was basically rotting away. It's such an extremely quick transformation here. And within 22 days of that exposure, he was dead. Now, of course, Russia denies any involvement at all with Alexander's death. Andrei Lugovoy, one of the two main suspects, was made a member of the Russian parliament back in 2007, less than a year after Alexander's murder. This move gave him immunity from any possible prosecution and a cushy, rewarding life and career. And neither one of them will ever be extradited out of Russia, and therefore they are protected from any real investigations. Really, one of the last things that Alexander did was request his pictures of how he looked right before he died. He wanted them public. He wanted them put in the news so people could see what had happened. And his quote was, "I want the world to see what they did to me." And Alexander's radioactive body was laid to rest at the Highgate Cemetery, not far from here. And here's his grave. Now, maybe kind of hard to see in the video, but it says he was born December 4th, 1962. But there's some discrepancy with that. It's either December 4th or August 30th, 1962. And he was either 43 or 44. He spent about 3 weeks in the hospital, basically just rotting away from the poison, from the radiation. So on a side note, people will do this to their tombstone, to their loved one's tombstone, which basically means that they died too early. So it was basically their life got cut off early. During the autopsy, Dr. Carey and his colleagues wore 2 suits, special protective gloves, and a specialized hood which had air pumped into them through a filter. I mean, you're doing an autopsy on someone who is literally radioactive. Some of you might be saying, well, if he was radioactive, if he died of that, then is his body still radioactive? Yeah, I guess, yeah. In fact, he was buried in a lead-lined coffin. So it's safe for people walking above and past him, standing above him. But it's unbelievable to think of that your loved one is still, their body and their bones are radioactive. So that's the crazy story of Alexander Litvinenko. It's just unbelievable what can happen to you in life. So I guess be careful who you go out to have tea with in the future. All right, I'm getting out of here. See you in the next video.